Funny, isn't it? How you keep feeding poison, hoping it'll taste like love if you just close your eyes tight enough. You wrap your arms around something cold and coiled, whispering trust into a mouth full of venom. And every time it strikes, you call it an accident. You say it didn't mean it, but deep down, oh, you knew. You saw the flick of the tongue, the shift in its skin, the way it only got close when it was hungry. And yet you stayed, because sometimes the pain is familiar, sometimes betrayal feels like home. But the real joke is thinking love can fix evil. That if you're kind enough, soft enough, broken enough, it'll finally change. You see, the thing about love is people think it's a cure. A magic little pill you swallow and poof, everything that was dark turns into light. And the monsters under the bed start singing lullabies. But love, real love, it's not a magician. It's not an exorcist. It doesn't cast out demons. It just sits next to them and asks them nicely to behave. And you, oh, you beautiful fool, you thought that if you just loved hard enough, maybe the snake would stop hissing. Maybe the fangs would retract. Maybe that cold blood would warm up in your hands. You called it potential. You called it loyalty. But really, it was desperation wrapped in hope. You knew what it was. From the very first time it looked you dead in the eye and smiled while lying. From the first moment it twisted your truth into something ugly and you swallowed it, thinking maybe it was your fault for bleeding too loudly. But no, you didn't fall in love with a misunderstood soul. You fell in love with a predator that knew exactly how to mimic sick. And you called it love because your heart wanted to believe that pain was the price of connection. And so you fed it your peace, your sanity, your self-respect like scraps at the table. You adjusted your spine so it could slither around you more comfortably. You dimmed your light because it said it had sensitive eyes. And every time it struck you, you apologized. Isn't that sweet? You took the blame for its bite. And that's the part that stings, doesn't it? Not the betrayal, not the scars, but how willing you were to excuse them. But here's where it gets really funny when God steps in. When he sees you clutching a thing that's draining you dry and says, enough. When he snatches it away, not gently, not with explanation, but fast and rough like tearing poison from a child's hands. And you scream, you cry, you beg for the snake back because you've mistaken the venom for affection. You've confused survival with intimacy. And when the cage door swings open, you hesitate, not because you're free, but because you don't know how to live without the sound of rattling called a your person. You're one. Your lesson. But God called it a distraction, a curse, a slow smiling death sentence. And he removed it not because he wanted to hurt you, but because you refused to let go of what was designed to kill your soul softly over time. You can't love something into becoming good if it feeds on destruction. You can't sing lullabies to a serpent and expect it not to dance to the sound of your suffering. And you wonder, why does it hurt so much when it hurts? Why does the silence feel louder than the chaos ever did? Because you got addicted to the noise, the drama, the chasing, the illusion of almost. You thought healing would come from hugging the broken pieces tighter, not realizing the shards were slicing deeper the longer you held them. But now the wound gets to breathe. Now the fog lifts just enough for you to see what you were calling love was actually manipulation in a silk robe. There's a difference between someone being wounded and someone being wicked. One wants help, the other wants a host. And you opened your door thinking you were saving a life, but really you were giving up your own. The snake didn't want healing, it wanted access. And you were the perfect gateway. Too forgiving, too hopeful, too unaware that not every sad story deserves your time. So when God took it, when he yanked it from your arms and left you standing in the wreckage, maybe that was the first time you were ever actually safe. You just didn't recognize safety because chaos had been your home. You missed the poison because it was all you ever drank. But freedom doesn't always feel warm at first. Sometimes it burns. Sometimes it echoes, sometimes it leaves you staring at empty hands, wondering who you are without the thing that broke you, pretending to love you. You ever notice how pain feels familiar? Like an old friend that shows up uninvited, kicks off its shoes, and makes itself at home on your couch. That's the thing about familiar pain, it's cozy, predictable. It knows where you keep your secrets, your soft spots, your deepest fears. And you let it stay because you've convinced yourself that something so consistent must be meant for you. You don't even flinch anymore when it stings. You just breathe through it like it's part of your routine. Wake up, smile, get hurt, repeat, and then there's that voice in your head, oh, that sweet little saboteur whispering that this must be your path. That loyalty means staying even when it rots you from the inside out. That endurance is a badge of honor, even if it leads you straight into misery. You call it strength, but really it's just silence. The kind that creeps in when you've ignored yourself for too long. When you've made room for everyone else's poison and left none left for your own healing. When the pain becomes the proof that you're still trying, still loving, still hoping for a shift that never comes. You want to know what's wild? The idea that you thought this pain was sacred. You spiritualized it. You gave it holy names. You said things like it's building character or it's teaching me patience, as if God needs you to be broken to prove a point. As if your suffering is a sign of spiritual maturity, when really it's just a sign that you forgot how to leave. That you've mistaken bondage for loyalty and called it destiny because you're too tired to fight the current anymore. You dressed your wear, put makeup on bruises, covered betrayal in pretty words like compromise and unconditional. You became fluent in the language of pretending. You got so good at it, you started to believe your own lies. Told yourself that maybe this is just how love works. That maybe chaos is romantic. That maybe being chosen means always choosing them even when they never chose you back in any way that mattered. You see, the snake you loved didn't come with fangs at first. No, it came wrapped in charm, draped in flattery, humming all your favorite songs. It mirrored your dreams, whispered your fears, and promised to stay as long as you kept bleeding. And you did. You bled out every boundary, every instinct. Every time you wanted to scream, you swallowed it. Every time you saw the mask slip, you closed your eyes. Because the truth was too ugly. And the lie. Well, it had better lighting. Familiar pain doesn't just visit. It camps. It builds a nest. And if you're not careful, you start feeding it. You give it your time, your energy, your sanity. You rearrange your life to accommodate its chaos. And before you know it, you're defending the thing that's draining you. You're fighting to keep what's breaking you. You're telling people to mind their business when they say you look tired. You laugh and say you're just going through a phase. But deep down, you know it's not a phase. It's a pattern. You weren't addicted to the person. You were addicted to the cycle. The highs, the crashes, the fantasy, the almost. That dopamine hit when they remembered to be kind right after being cruel. That little breadcrumb of affection after days of silence. And you ate it up like it was a feast. Because you were starving for something real. But real love doesn't starve you. It doesn't shrink you. It doesn't make you question your worth every other week. God didn't remove that snake because he wanted to punish you. He removed it because he saw you were about to name your grave home. He saw how deep you were willing to dig just to keep something that only ever knew how to bury you. He waited, give you signs, warnings, whispers, but when you wouldn't move, he did. And yes, it felt like betrayal. Yes, it felt like heartbreak, but maybe it was divine surgery. And surgery doesn't always come with anesthesia. You thought it was love, but it was just a reflection of your wounds. You thought it was meant to last, but it was only meant to teach. Not about how to hold on, but how to let go. Not about how to sacrifice, but how to protect your soul. Not about how to fix others, but how to finally see yourself clearly in the mirror they always tried to shatter. You really thought the venom would turn to honey if you just held on long enough. That if you poured enough love into the cracks, the poison would forget how to crawl. You saw the red flags, didn't you? Oh, of course you did. You just called them warnings from a past life, not this life. You told yourself they'd change. You made excuses, rehearsed apologies they never even gave you, played both parts in a conversation where they never showed up, and still you stayed. Not because you didn't know better, don't insult your own intelligence, but because leaving meant admitting that what you gave your heart to was never real. And that stings more than the snake ever could, because lies wrapped in love are the hardest ones to untangle. They tangle around your logic, your faith, your memories. They twist around your future and convince you that without this pain, you'll have nothing. That without this chaos, you're nobody, but oh, the joke is that you were already vanishing while holding on to them. Let me tell you something about poison. It doesn't always burn going down. Sometimes it tastes sweet like safety. Sometimes it sounds like I need you or no one understands me like you do. Sometimes it feels like home, because dysfunction has a way of dressing up in clothes that look like comfort. And you, desperate for connection, opened your door without checking the teeth behind the smile. And what did they give you? Guilt. Games. Gaslight wrapped in grace. 1 minute you're the light of their life, and the next you're the burden they never asked for. And yet you kept trying. You rewrote yourself in languages you didn't even speak, hoping maybe this version would be enough. You walked on eggshells barefoot, hoping they'd at least look at the mess and say thank you. They didn't. They never do, because people like that don't see the bleeding, they see the silence. And silence to them means permission. You cried in secret, deceived, laughed in public, smiled at your own funeral, pretending it was a party. You prayed for a sign, and when it came, you asked for a clearer one. You begged for truth, but held your hands over your ears every time it whispered leave. Because the pain was predictable, and predictable things feel like control. But love isn't supposed to feel like losing. It's not supposed to sound like screaming into a void and calling the echo intimacy, and still you held on. Not because you were weak, but because you were loyal to a fault. Loyal to the story you wrote in your head about what this could become. Loyal to the fantasy that maybe, just maybe, if you bled long enough, they'd notice the color of your sacrifice. But all they did was step over your body and ask why the floor was wet. You think it was the snake that fooled you? No, it was you who gave it a name it didn't earn. Who fed it, protected it, told others to back off when they saw the fangs. Because somewhere deep down you thought love meant saving someone, even if it meant not losing yourself. But the truth, you were the one who needed saving. From them, from the cycle, from the belief that suffering somehow proves your worth, and so God stepped in. Not gently, not quietly. Because let's be honest, you wouldn't have listened if he whispered. You needed thunder, you needed the collapse. You needed the kind of loss that forces clarity. And when it hit, oh did it hit. Felt like betrayal, like death. Like the kind of silence that echoes in your bones. But buried beneath all that chaos was mercy. A kind of protection you didn't recognize because it came wearing the face of devastation. You still ache, don't you? Still stare at old pictures and wonder if any of it was ever real. Still hear their voice when it rains. Still flinch when someone raises theirs. But maybe that ache isn't weakness. Maybe it's your body remembering what it survived. Maybe it's the part of you that still believes in love trying to reintroduce itself, just this time without the snake in next time. If there is a next time, maybe you'll call bite what it is, not what you hope it becomes. Maybe you'll remember that not all pain is holy and not every wound needs a reason. Some just need to be left behind. You saw the fangs, you did. Let's not pretend they weren't obvious. They glistened when they smiled, sharp, precise. But oh, they called you darling right after. And you believed the word instead of the bite. That's the thing about hope, it's not always brave. Sometimes it's delusional. Sometimes it's a mask we wear to keep ourselves from looking in the mirror and asking, why do I keep loving what breaks me? They didn't just crawl into your life, you unlighted at the door, rolled out a red carpet, told everyone they've changed. And maybe for a moment they did. Or maybe they just got better at hiding the venom. Either way, you stayed. You dressed the poison up like perfume, gave the pain a playlist, set the fire, and then blamed the smoke for choking you. Because somewhere deep in your bones, you thought that if you just loved hard enough, it would stop hurting. You confused longevity with loyalty. Thought surviving the storm meant you were meant for it. But some storms don't pass. Some just wear you down until you forget you're standing in one. And when the thunder quiets, it's not peace, it's exhaustion. You weren't in love, you were in a battle. And not with them, no. With yourself. Fighting to be seen. Fighting to matter. Trying to convince someone who never deserved you that you were worthy of the very thing they kept withholding, like it was a prize you had to earn. And oh, how you danced. Not with joy, not with freedom. You danced for approval. Bent yourself into shapes so unnatural. Your soul started splintering. Smiling while sinking. Laughing while leaking. And all the while they watched, unbothered, maybe even entertained. Because some people don't want love, they want control. They don't want to heal with you. They want to see if you'll bleed on command. And when you cried, you did it quietly, didn't you? Because saying it out loud made it real. And real meant failure. Real meant you'd have to face the truth. You were trying to save someone who never asked to be saved. That you were loving a ghost of who they pretended to be in the beginning. That the person who hurt you kept doing it. Because you kept letting them. It wasn't love. It was survival. A twisted kind of hope that made you believe the next time they yelled it'd be the last. The next apology would come without conditions. That one day they'd look at you and finally see the cost of your silence. But they never did. They saw you as a mirror, not a person. A reflection of their power. Something to test, to twist, to manipulate into proving they still mattered, and still you called it love. Because calling it abuse meant accepting that you gave your heart to someone who was never holding theirs. That you invested soul in something that was bankrupt from the beginning. But see, you're not the villain here. You're the proof that even the strongest hearts can get trapped in pretty cages. That even warriors can mistake chains for bracelets if they're shiny enough, and then something snapped. Not loud, not violent, just a shift. The lie cracked. The performance lost its script. And in that silence you saw it. The truth. Raw. Ugly. Unforgiving. That you were alone in a relationship built on your effort and their ego. That you were being loved for your obedience, not your essence, so you prayed. Maybe not with words. Maybe just with a final sigh. Maybe just with a quiet whisper inside that said, please. And that's all it took, not a shout. Not a sermon, just a surrender. And suddenly the snake was gone. No big drama. Just gone. Slithered out like it knew its time was up. And it hurt. Of course it hurt. Because even poison feels like home when you've been drinking it long enough. Even pain starts to feel like love when that's all you've known. But this wasn't ration. This was abandonment. This was rescue in disguise. A divine interruption. A clean break from the thing that was breaking you. Not because you were too weak to leave, but because even the strongest get tired of bleeding for people who never bring bandages, and maybe now you sit in the silence, trying to remember who were before you made excuses for them. Trying to find the version of yourself that didn't flinch at kindness, didn't second-guess love, didn't mistake chaos for passion. That version still exists. Buried maybe, but alive. Waiting for the moment you realize you never needed a snake to feel whole. You ever notice how the ones you fight hard? For other ones holding the blade behind their back. Not always out in the open. No, that would be too easy. They hide it in compliments and apologies, in the way they touch your face right before they twist the knife. And you keep calling it love. Keep thinking if you just give more, bend more, break more, maybe they'll finally stop hurting you. But snakes don't stop being snakes just because you loved them like they were puppies. They still bite. That's their nature. Only difference is now you've got fangs in your back and silence in your mouth. Funny how quiet pain can be when you've gotten used to it. They don't always scream. Sometimes they whisper. Sometimes they look you in the eye and tell you you're overreacting, that you're too sensitive, that maybe if you weren't so emotional they wouldn't have to act that way. And you sit there questioning your own sanity, rearranging your memories to fit their version of the story, until eventually your truth becomes their fiction, and their fiction becomes your reality. It's not magic, it's manipulation. And you, my dear, you were the stage. You were the curtain, the spotlight, the script. Applause, they just performed. And when they were done, they left no bow, no encore. Just silence and a trail of shattered pieces. You tried to warn yourself, didn't you? Deep down in that place you don't talk about, you heard the alarm. But you snoozed it, over and over again. Because loneliness can sound a lot like loyalty when you're scared of being alone. You kept feeding the fire, kept patching the leaks, kept pretending the foundation wasn't cracking beneath your feet. You were the glue, the tape, the duct tape mess of a person holding it all together. And no one noticed because they were too busy watching you smile. That smile, the one you wore like armor. The one you painted on every day, hoping no one would look close enough to see the cracks. There's a kind of madness in trying to love someone out of their brokenness. Thinking if you pour enough light into their darkness, they'll finally see you. But light doesn't fix people who enjoy the shadows. It just makes them squint, makes them angry, makes them want to break the source of the light just so they can go back to hiding. You weren't a partner, you were a mirror, and mirrors, well, they don't lie. That's why they hated you, because you made them see themselves, and they couldn't stand the reflection, so they blamed you for everything, for the chaos, for the arguments, for the silence. You became the villain in the story you wrote together. And every time you stood up for yourself, they made you feel like the enemy. Because standing up meant disrupting their narrative. And that was the real crime, not the lies, not the pain. But the fact that you dared to say, I deserve better. You became a problem the moment you stopped being their puppet. And problems, they get discarded. But you stayed, of course you did, because love, real or not, has a way of chaining us to hope. And hope, it's the cruelest illusion of all. It keeps you rooted in a place where nothing grows. It tells you one more chance. It whispers they didn't mean it. It promises this time will be different. And it never is. Not really. Because they don't change. Not because they can't. But because they don't want to. Why would they? You kept coming back, kept forgiving, kept bleeding and calling it devotion. Then one day something shifted, not in them, in you. You stopped crying over the same apology, stopped waiting for a phone call that never came, stopped replaying the memories like they were still worth something. In that silence you feared so much, it started to feel like peace, like healing. Like maybe, just maybe, you were finally waking up from the nightmare you kept calling a love story. You didn't lose them. You lost the illusion, and in that loss you found clarity. The snake didn't slither away because it was tired. It was removed, pulled out by a force greater than your desperation, removed like poison from a wound. Because even God gets tired of watching you dance with vipers in the name of loyalty. You weren't abandoned, you were rescued. And sometimes the greatest blessings come wrapped in heartbreak. Sometimes the greatest act of love is being forced to let go of what you thought you couldn't live without. And now you sit with the silence, with the stillness, with the truth. The kind of truth that doesn't need validation, doesn't need explanation, just exists, quietly, boldly, like a scar that no longer hurts but reminds you of what you survived.